Alexander the Great, a decade that changed the world. In 334 BC, Alexander, the 20-year-old king of Macedonia, led an army of 40,000 men across the Hellespont into Asia, launching a campaign against the most powerful empire the world had ever known, Persia. In the astonishing decade that followed, he carved out one of the largest empires in human history. To the Persians, he was Alexander the Accursed. To the West, he was immortalized as Alexander the Great. To understand this extraordinary campaign, we must first look back to an earlier age. Around 500 BC, ancient Greece had given the world democracy, philosophy, and art. Its two greatest city-states, Athens and Sparta, had once stood together against Persian invasion. In 480 BC, 300 Spartans held the pass of Thermopylae for 3 days against a vast Persian host. The Greek fleet then destroyed the Persian navy at Salamis, and the following year a decisive Greek victory at Plataea ended the Persian invasion for good. That memory burned in every Greek heart, and would become the rallying cry for Alexander's own war in the East. But decades of ruinous warfare between the city-states had left Greece exhausted. Into that vacuum stepped a kingdom long dismissed by sophisticated Greeks as a backwater, Macedonia. Under King Philip II, Macedonia became a formidable military power. Philip introduced the sarissa, an 18-foot pike, and drilled his infantry to fight in a tight formation known as a phalanx. In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip crushed the combined forces of Thebes and Athens, then united nearly all of Greece under the Hellenic League with himself as supreme commander. He began planning a great pan-Hellenic war of revenge against Persia, a crumbling superpower whose legendary wealth was ripe for the taking. But on the eve of launching his war, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards, a victim of Macedonia's brutal court intrigues. His 20-year-old son Alexander inherited both the throne and the grand design. Tutored by Aristotle, possessed of a brilliant and restless mind, already hardened in battle, Alexander moved swiftly. Potential rivals were executed. Rebellions in Illyria, Thessaly, and central Greece were crushed. When Thebes rose against him, he razed the ancient city to the ground and sold its people into slavery as a warning to all. In the spring of 334 BC, he was ready. He crossed the Hellespont, and the greatest military campaign in history had begun. His army was built around several formidable components. The Macedonian phalanx, whose men wielded the 18-foot sarissa in 16 ranks deep, forming an almost unstoppable wall of iron spear points. Elite infantry shield-bearers to guard his flanks. Light skirmishers from Thrace and Illyria armed with javelins and bows. And the cream of the force, the companion cavalry. 1,800 elite horsemen led by Alexander himself. The first great test came at the river Granicus. The Persian provincial governors, dismissing sound advice to avoid battle and starve Alexander out, drew up their cavalry along the far bank. Alexander, ignoring counsel to wait for dawn, ordered an immediate assault. He led his right wing into the river under a hail of missiles, buying time for the rest of his army to cross. In the thick of the fighting, he twice came close to death, but the crossing held. Once the Macedonian phalanx was across, the Persian cavalry broke and fled. The Greek mercenaries in Persian service were surrounded and massacred. With one battle, all of Asia Minor lay open before him. Alexander swept down the coast, capturing the Persian naval bases at Miletus and Halicarnassus, steadily dismantling Persia's sea power. In 333 BC, pressing deeper into Anatolia, he was shown the legendary Gordian knot, a prophecy held that whoever could untie it would rule all Asia. Alexander drew his sword and cut it in two. Then came the decisive confrontation. The Persian king Darius III himself led a massive army to block Alexander's advance, seizing a narrow coastal plain near Issus, barely 6 miles wide between mountains and sea. The terrain nullified his enormous numerical advantage, but it also trapped Alexander. Undaunted, Alexander attacked. His right wing shattered the Persian left. In the center, his phalanx was briefly pushed back by Darius's Greek mercenaries, until Alexander wheeled his cavalry and drove straight into the Persian center. Darius, faced with this apparently unstoppable enemy, fled the battlefield in his royal chariot. His army dissolved. Among the prizes of victory, Darius's wife, mother, and children, all treated with respect by Alexander, who wished to be seen as a liberator, not a conqueror. In 332 BC, Alexander continued south along the coast. Most Phoenician cities submitted, but the island fortress of Tyre held out for 7 months until Alexander's engineers built a causeway to the island and breached its walls. Gaza fell next. Then Egypt surrendered without a fight. Ancient priests welcomed him as a pharaoh, a liberator from Persian rule. At the mouth of the Nile, he founded a city bearing his name, Alexandria, that would one day become one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. In 331 BC, Alexander turned east toward the Persian heartland. At Gaugamela, near modern Mosul in Iraq, Darius had assembled his last great army, perhaps 50 to 80,000 strong, with cavalry from Armenia and India, 200 side chariots, and even a handful of war elephants. The Persians had carefully leveled the ground to give their chariots room to operate, but Alexander's tactics were equal to the challenge. He led his wing on a wide rightward sweep, drawing Persian cavalry out of position and thinning their center. When the moment came, he drove his companion cavalry and infantry like a spear point straight into the weakened Persian line. Expert javelin throwers neutralized the chariot charge by killing the horses and crews. Darius fled again. On the left, Alexander's general Parmenio was nearly overwhelmed, but Alexander abandoned his pursuit and turned to rescue him. The last Persian horseman broke and ran. Gaugamela was total victory. The road to Babylon lay open. Alexander entered Babylon in triumph. Susa surrendered. He forced a mountain pass known as the Persian Gates and reached Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the empire. He ordered it looted and burned, retribution for the Persian destruction of Athens 150 years before. Pressing north into Media, he hunted Darius, but the fugitive king was murdered by his own governor Bessus before Alexander could reach him. Alexander gave orders for Darius to be buried with full royal honors, then declared himself the legitimate successor of the Persian kings. The years that followed were harder. In what is today Afghanistan and Tajikistan, Alexander faced grinding guerrilla warfare that wore down even his finest troops. In Samarkand, in a drunken rage, he killed Clitus the Black, the very man who had saved his life with the Granicus, and was consumed by remorse afterward. His attempt to impose Persian court ritual on his Macedonian officers triggered fierce resistance. Plots against his life multiplied. He had his cavalry commander Philotas executed and dispatched assassins to kill Philotas's father Parmenio, the veteran general who had commanded his left wing in every great battle, before the old man could learn of his son's death. In 327 BC, he crossed the Hindu Kush into what is now Pakistan, fighting his way through the Swat Valley, and at the Battle of the Hydaspes delivered the most costly victory of his career against the war elephants of King Porus. Yet, when he sought to press on deeper into India, his army mutinied at the river Beas. The men had marched thousands of miles over 8 years. They had heard rumors of vast armies waiting ahead. They refused to go further. For once, Alexander had no choice but to turn back. The return journey was brutal. Part of the army sailed home by sea under the Admiral Nearchus, passing through the Strait of Hormuz in one of the great voyages of ancient exploration. Alexander led the rest overland to the Gedrosian Desert, where savage heat and lack of food and water killed thousands. On returning to Persia, he executed several governors who had abused their power during his long absence. At Susa, he staged a mass wedding of Macedonian officers to Persian noblewomen, seeking to bind his two worlds together. When his Macedonian troops mutinied over his apparent preference for Persian ways, he had the ringleaders executed, then addressed his men in an emotional speech that ended in reconciliation. At Ecbatana, his closest companion Hephaestion died of fever. Alexander was devastated, going days without eating and ordering an empire-wide period of mourning. He campaigned briefly against hill tribes in the Zagros Mountains, returned to Babylon, and there, in June 323 BC, suddenly fell ill with fever and died within days. He was 32 years old. Whether the cause was malaria, typhoid, or poison, no one has ever determined with certainty. He died undefeated. His empire, stretching from Greece to modern Pakistan, was the largest the world had yet seen, but he left no plan for succession, and his generals immediately began tearing it apart. His widow Roxana and his infant son were murdered. His golden sarcophagus, hijacked en route to Macedonia, ended up in Alexandria in Egypt. And where it lies today remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Few men have shaped the course of civilization as profoundly as Alexander the Great. The world he created, the Hellenistic age, in which Greek language, art, and ideas fused with traditions of Egypt, Persia, and the East, endure for centuries after his death, laying foundations on which Rome, Christianity, and Islam would all eventually build. The breathtaking achievements of his brief life still echo across the millennia,